A young girl vanished without a trace on what should have been just another Sunday drive, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. For 12 long years, her disappearance remained one of those haunting mysteries that slowly faded from headlines, but never from the minds of those who loved her. Then, impossibly, her car was discovered locked away in an abandoned barn, preserved like a time capsule of that fateful day. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. May 3rd, 1998, dawned like any other spring Sunday in Willow Bend, Indiana. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows of the Dunham family home as Rachel Dunham sipped her coffee, keys already dangling from her fingers. At 19, with fiery red hair and a restless spirit, these Sunday drives had become her ritual. A few precious hours of freedom before another demanding week at Indiana State University. "I'll be back before dinner," Rachel called out to her parents, Dana and Mark Dunham, who were still lingering over the Sunday paper. Dana looked up with a distracted smile, used to her daughter's weekend excursions. "Drive safe, honey," Mark replied, not knowing these would be words he'd replay in his mind for years to come. The black Pontiac Firebird purred to life in the driveway, its formula trim gleaming in the mid-morning sun. Rachel slid her favorite mixtape into the deck, the familiar hiss of the cassette a comforting prelude to the music. She rolled down the windows, letting the sweet spring air rush through her hair as she pulled away from the quiet suburban street. For Rachel, these drives were sanctuary. After a week of cramming for exams and tutoring fellow students at the community library, the winding backroads of Willow Bend County offered solitude and clarity. The young woman had mapped dozens of routes over the years, sometimes venturing as far as Fort Wayne before circling back home. By 6 o'clock, when shadows began stretching across the Dunham's driveway, Dana glanced at the clock with only mild concern. Rachel sometimes lost track of time, especially when the weather was this perfect. By 7, she called her daughter's cell phone, that clunky Motorola that Rachel complained about but never left behind. The call went straight to voicemail. "She's probably just getting gas," Mark reasoned, though a subtle tension had crept into his voice. By 9, they'd called Rachel's friends from university. By 10, they'd driven her usual routes themselves, scanning ditches and parking lots for any sign of the distinctive sports car. At midnight, the Dunham home became command central for a growing search. Neighbors arrived with thermoses of coffee and concerned expressions. The local sheriff, who'd known Rachel since she was in pigtails, took detailed notes while trying to reassure the increasingly frantic parents. "She's never done this before," Dana kept repeating, clutching a framed photo of her daughter. "Something's wrong." By dawn, the entire town knew Rachel Dunham and her black Firebird had vanished without a trace. What began as an ordinary Sunday drive had transformed into the first chapter of a mystery that would haunt Willow Bend County for more than a decade. The search for Rachel Dunham began with a ripple of concern that quickly escalated into a tidal wave of panic. By sunset on that fateful Sunday, Dana and Mark Dunham had called every one of their daughter's friends from Indiana State University, each conversation ending with the same hollow reassurance. "I'm sure she'll turn up soon." Sheriff's deputies combed the county highways through the night, their flashlights sweeping across empty asphalt. Not a single skid mark suggested a hasty departure or collision. The black Pontiac Firebird, with its distinctive formula trim that made it stand out in sleepy Willow Bend, had seemingly dissolved into thin air. "We've never had a disappearance this clean," Deputy Wilson told the distraught parents as Monday dawned without a trace of their daughter. "It's like she drove off the map." The Dunhams huddled around the kitchen table, Dana clutching Rachel's high school graduation photo, while Mark made call after call. Their daughter's Motorola had gone silent after 1:07 in the afternoon. Its final ping registered near the county line, then nothing. The device never connected to another tower. By noon on Monday, Willow Bend's small police force had called in the Indiana State Police, Troopers in crisp uniforms spread across 3 counties, their questions always the same. Had anyone seen a young redhead in a black sports car? The answer invariably was no. We've got officers checking every gas station between here and Fort Wayne, the state police captain assured the Dunhams. Someone must have seen something, but the silence was deafening. Cashiers at Speedway stations shook their heads. Waitresses at roadside diners flipped through their order tickets, finding no trace of a girl matching Rachel's description. The security cameras at the county's only bank captured nothing but the usual Monday morning traffic. Robert Keene, a private investigator who'd later become deeply entangled in the case, would later remark that it was as if someone had orchestrated the perfect vanishing act. People don't just disappear, he told a local reporter. Cars don't evaporate. Somebody knows something. As Tuesday approached, with still no sign of Rachel or her vehicle, the search expanded to include helicopter sweeps of the farmland that stretched like a patchwork quilt across Willowbend County. Farmers on tractors scanned their fields. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through wooded areas. The community rallied around the Dunham family, bringing food and offering prayers. But beneath the solidarity ran an undercurrent of unease. If Rachel could vanish so completely on a sunny Sunday afternoon, on roads she'd traveled hundreds of times before, what did that mean for everyone else's sense of security? By the end of that first week, the absence of evidence had become its own kind of evidence, pointing towards something far more calculated than a simple accident or impulsive flight. Rachel and her Firebird hadn't just disappeared, they'd been erased. The Pontiac Firebird formula that Rachel Dunham drove wasn't just any vehicle, it was a statement piece. Glossy black with the distinctive Ram Air hood scoop and rear spoiler. The 1997 model stood out in a county where pickup trucks and sensible sedans dominated the roads. Only 3 formula trims had been sold within a 100-mile radius of Willowbend that year, and Rachel's was the only black one. That car should be impossible to miss, Sheriff Tanner told Dana and Mark Dunham 3 days after their daughter vanished. It's like looking for a penguin in a chicken coop. The distinctive nature of the sports car quickly became the focal point of the investigation. State troopers distributed detailed bulletins with photographs and the vehicle identification number to every law enforcement agency across 3 states. They contacted every auto shop, junkyard, and chop shop informant in their network. The Firebird's license plate number flashed on highway signs from Indianapolis to Cincinnati. Rachel's car had another identifying feature: a small Indiana State University parking decal in the lower corner of the windshield and a cassette adapter dangling from the stereo. Mark had insisted on adding an aftermarket alarm system when he'd helped his daughter purchase the automobile just 6 months before her disappearance. That alarm would scream bloody murder if anyone so much as brushed against it wrong, he explained to Detective Morris, his voice cracking. Rachel used to joke it was more protective than I was. Yet, as days turned to weeks, not a single credible sighting materialized. No traffic cameras captured the distinctive silhouette. No highway patrol officer spotted it cruising along Interstate 70. The vehicle had seemingly evaporated from existence, taking Rachel with it. Some investigators began to theorize that the car must have been immediately dismantled or hidden in a private garage, a theory that pointed to someone with considerable resources and knowledge. Others suggested it might have been driven across state lines to Michigan or Kentucky, beyond the immediate search area. Whoever took that car knew exactly what they were doing, Robert Keene told the Dunhams during their 3rd meeting. The private investigator tapped his pen against his notepad thoughtfully. They understood how to disappear completely. The absence of the Firebird cast a long shadow over every theory. If someone could make a rare, eye-catching sports car vanish without a trace, what else were they capable of? This troubling question haunted investigators and the Dunham family alike. For 12 long years, the missing Firebird would remain as much a ghost as Rachel herself, a phantom vehicle that existed only in photographs, and the fading memories of those who had seen it cruise the streets of Willowbend on that fateful Sunday afternoon. Dana and Mark Dunham's life became a testament to frozen time. The couple transformed their modest two-story home into what neighbors quietly called the waiting room, a place suspended between grief and hope. Rachel's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it that Sunday morning in May. Her Indiana University hoodie still draped casually over the desk chair, as if she might return any moment to slip it on against the evening chill. The towers of cassette mixtapes she'd meticulously alphabetized stood like tiny monuments to her passions. "I dust in here every Tuesday," Dana would explain to visitors, her fingers trailing over her daughter's belongings with reverent care. "But I never move anything. She needs to find everything where she left it." The Dunhams remortgaged their home within 6 months of Rachel's disappearance, pouring every available dollar into a revolving door of private investigators. Mark, once meticulous about retirement planning, now spoke only of when we find her, as he signed away their financial security. Each detective brought temporary surges of hope that inevitably crashed into disappointment. Phone calls that led nowhere, reported sightings that couldn't be verified, theories that dissolved under scrutiny. "We had this one fellow from Chicago who was certain she'd been seen at a gas station in Ohio," Mark told the Willow Bend Herald on the first anniversary of the disappearance. 3 weeks and $4,000 later, it turned out to be someone who just looked like her. "But we'd do it again tomorrow if there was even a whisper of a lead." The community rallied around the couple with the fierce protectiveness that only small towns can muster. Every Sunday, someone from Willow Bend High, where Rachel had graduated, would appear on their porch with a home-cooked meal. The local church organized prayer circles. Even teenagers who had barely known Rachel would stop by with awkward offerings. A wildflower bouquet, a mixtape of songs they thought might bring comfort. But nothing filled the void. The Dunham smiles grew thinner, their eyes more hollow. They attended every community event, handed out flyers at state fairs, and kept Rachel's photo pinned to their clothing like badges. Their desperation became Willow Bend's collective heartbeat, a shared rhythm of hope against impossible odds. "Sometimes I wake up and forget for just a second," Dana confessed to her sister one night, "and then it all comes crashing back, and I have to learn how to breathe all over again." Still, they refused to hold a memorial service. There would be no closure without answers. The calendar pages turned, but in the Dunham home, time stood perfectly still, waiting for the daughter who never returned from her Sunday drive. 6 months into Rachel Dunham's disappearance, the Dunham family was grasping at straws. Dana and Mark had depleted their savings and mortgaged their modest Willow Bend home to hire a team of private investigators. Among them was Robert Keene, a former Chicago detective with a reputation for solving cold cases. One rainy Tuesday, Keene burst into the Dunham living room, his eyes bright with excitement. "I found something," he announced, spreading documents across their coffee table. Rachel bought a bus ticket to Chicago. She was using the name Rebecca Dunn. The evidence seemed compelling. A Greyhound ticket stub dated May 4th, one day after Rachel vanished. The clerk at the Fort Wayne bus terminal had signed an affidavit stating he remembered a young woman with red hair and hands that couldn't stay still. She'd paid cash, kept her sunglasses on indoors, and carried only a small backpack. Hope surged through the Dunham household. Mark immediately called the Willow Bend sheriff, who dispatched 2 deputies to interview the clerk again. Dana began calling relatives in Illinois, asking if they'd seen her daughter. But when state police investigators pressed the clerk for more details, his story began to unravel. First, he couldn't remember what the young woman was wearing. Then he wasn't sure if her hair was red or auburn. Finally, under persistent questioning, he broke down and admitted he'd never seen Rachel at all. "I just wanted to help," he sobbed to the detectives. "That family looked so desperate on the news." The lead collapsed, crushing the Dunhams' renewed hope. But 3 years later, the truth emerged with even more disturbing implications. Bank records revealed the clerk had received an anonymous money order for $2,000 just days before coming forward with his fabricated story. The payment had been sent from a post office in Joliet, Illinois, with no return address. Handwriting experts couldn't conclusively match it to anyone connected to the case. "It was deliberate," Robert Keene later told the Indianapolis Star. "Someone wanted us chasing ghosts in Chicago while the real evidence grew cold in Indiana." The bus ticket ruse became one of the most perplexing elements of Rachel's case. Who would benefit from such misdirection? The Willow Bend sheriff theorized it might have been Clyde Crane, trying to divert attention from the farmhouse where the vehicle would eventually be found. Others suspected a broader conspiracy, pointing to the sophisticated nature of the deception. For the Dunhams, it was just another cruel twist in their ongoing nightmare. "Every time we think we're getting closer to our daughter," Mark told reporters, "she slips further away." The false lead consumed valuable resources and investigation time, precisely what someone wanted. As winter settled over Willow Bend that year, the case grew as cold as the Indiana fields. The crisp October air carried the scent of fallen leaves as Colleen Moss fumbled with the oversized key. The realtor had shown dozens of foreclosed properties that season, but something about this abandoned farmhouse outside Willow Lake made her uneasy. The property had belonged to the late Wilford Crane, sitting empty since his passing 3 years prior, slowly being reclaimed by nature. "Just need to check the outbuildings," Colleen muttered to herself, approaching the weathered barn. The massive padlock was rusted but intact. When it finally yielded with a reluctant groan, she pushed open the heavy wooden door, disturbing years of settled dust. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the wooden slats, illuminating dancing particles and revealing what the darkness had concealed for 12 years. There, like a ghost made manifest, sat a black Pontiac Firebird. Helene's breath caught in her throat as recognition dawned. Everyone in Willow Bend knew about Rachel Dunham's disappearance. It was the kind of mystery that defined small towns. The realtor approached the vehicle cautiously, as if it might vanish like a mirage. The license plate, partially obscured by dust and cobwebs, matched the one that had been plastered across missing person flyers for over a decade. This was no coincidence. This was Rachel's car. The sports car appeared frozen in time, preserved in the barn's dry air. No signs of crash damage, no indication of why it had ended up here, miles from Rachel's usual routes. Colleen peered through the driver's window, her hand trembling as she dialed the sheriff's office. Inside the Firebird, Rachel's faded denim jacket lay draped across the driver's seat, as if its owner had just stepped away momentarily. 2 disposable cameras rested on the passenger seat, their secrets still locked in unexposed film. A Speedway gas receipt dated May 3, 1998, the very day of the disappearance, was tucked into the center console. Most haunting of all, the keys dangled from the ignition, waiting for a driver who never returned to complete her journey. Within the hour, Sheriff Thompson had cordoned off the property. By nightfall, the barn blazed with floodlights as forensic technicians meticulously documented everything. The news spread through Willow Bend like wildfire. Dana and Mark Dunham arrived, clinging to each other as they beheld their daughter's automobile for the first time in 12 years. "Where is she?" Dana whispered, her voice breaking. "If the car is here?" The question hung in the autumn air unanswered. The discovery had solved one mystery only to deepen another. Why was Rachel's vehicle hidden in Wilford Crane's barn? What happened to the 19-year-old college student who left for a Sunday drive and vanished without a trace? And who had locked the barn from the outside, ensuring the secret would remain hidden for over a decade? The forensic team descended on the weathered barn like a swarm of methodical insects. Dressed in white coveralls, they meticulously documented every inch of the space where Rachel Dunham's Pontiac Firebird had sat undisturbed for over a decade. The vehicle's black paint was dulled by years of dust, yet somehow preserved in the dry, dark confines of the structure. "We need to process everything," announced the lead technician, her voice echoing against the wooden walls. This isn't just about the automobile anymore. This is a crime scene. As they worked, Detective Samuel Hayes ran his gloved fingers along the interior of the massive wooden doors. The barn's entrance was solid oak, built to withstand Indiana winters and summer storms alike. His flashlight illuminated what everyone had missed during the initial excitement of finding the sports car, the series of faint, parallel lines gouged into the wood. "These aren't random," he muttered, calling over a colleague. "These are fingernail marks." The scratches told a horrifying story. Desperate, deliberate attempts to escape. Someone had been locked inside this barn against their will. The pattern suggested frantic clawing, becoming weaker toward the bottom of the door, as if the person had eventually slid to the ground in exhaustion or despair. Further examination revealed the most damning evidence. The heavy iron latch that secured the doors could only be operated from the outside. The barn had been deliberately sealed, with someone, possibly Rachel herself, trapped inside. "The lock mechanism shows no signs of tampering," observed a technician, photographing the rusted metal. "Whoever put this vehicle here wanted it to stay hidden." The Willow Bend Sheriff's Department called in additional resources as the gravity of the discovery sank in. This wasn't simply an abandoned car. It was potentially the scene of a violent crime. The isolation of the Crane property suddenly seemed sinister rather than merely rural. Located 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, screams would have gone unheard. Dana and Mark Dunham were kept away from the scene, spared from witnessing the methodical collection of evidence that might explain their daughter's fate. The parents had endured 12 years of agonizing uncertainty. Now they faced the possibility of an even more painful truth. As daylight faded, portable lights illuminated the barn's interior. The question hung heavy in the cool October air. Who had the means, motive, and opportunity to hide Rachel's distinctive automobile for 12 years without detection? And more importantly, where was Rachel herself? The forensic team worked through the night, their movements careful and precise. Every fiber, fingerprint, and fragment might finally answer the question that had haunted Willow Bend County for over a decade. The forensic lab in Fort Wayne worked through the night to develop the 2 disposable cameras found in Rachel Dunham's vehicle. When the images finally emerged, they offered the first visual chronicle of her final known hours. Frozen moments from a Sunday that had haunted Willow Bend for over a decade. The earliest photos captured Rachel at the Willow Bend Diner, leaning against her Pontiac Firebird with a carefree smile. Her red hair caught the morning light as she posed with a paper cup of coffee. Detective Sergeant Marlowe, who'd taken over the case in 2005, noted how the young woman's expression betrayed no fear, no premonition of what was to come. "She looks completely at ease," Dana whispered, tracing her daughter's face through the protective plastic sleeve. Mark stood behind his wife, one hand on her shoulder, unable to speak. The next series of images showed the journey itself. Rachel had documented her favorite Sunday drive route. Rolling Indiana farmland stretched to the horizon, punctuated by weathered barns and split rail fences. In 3 consecutive frames, she'd captured the winding back roads that led toward Willow Lake, the asphalt ribbon disappearing into stands of dogwoods and maples just beginning their spring bloom. Midway through the roll, Rachel had turned the camera on herself, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, laughing at something only she knew. The college student looked vibrant and alive. These images were particularly difficult for the Dunhams to view. Their daughter, hours before vanishing, documenting her own happiness. But it was the final 2 photographs that transformed the investigation entirely. In the penultimate image, Rachel's expression had changed. The smile was gone, replaced by something unreadable, concern, perhaps, or confusion. She appeared to be looking at something beyond the camera's frame. The very last photo explained why. Captured seemingly in haste, the image showed Rachel's rearview mirror. Reflected in it was a blurred figure, unmistakably male. Wearing a dark baseball cap and sunglasses despite the overcast conditions visible through the windshield. The man's posture suggested he was watching her, his head angled in a way that forensic psychologists later described as predatory. She knew she was being followed, Robert Keene observed, studying the image under magnification. The private investigator pointed to subtle details, how the angle suggested Rachel had taken the photo without raising the camera to her eye, how the slight motion blur indicated she might have been trying to drive while documenting her stalker. The photographs transformed Rachel's story from a mysterious disappearance to something far more sinister. Someone had been tracking her movements, perhaps for weeks. And on that Sunday in May, he had made his move. The grainy image from Rachel's disposable camera became the center of the investigation. Detective James Harmon and his team spent days hunched over light tables, squinting at the blurred figure reflected in the Firebird's rearview mirror. They methodically compared the shadowy face against hundreds of mugshots in the Willowbend County database. "That's him," Harmon finally announced, sliding a faded booking photo across the table. "Clyde Crane, last arrested in '87 for peeping through windows at the women's dormitory at Indiana State." Clyde Crane was no stranger to local law enforcement. In Willowbend, his name was whispered with the same cautious tone reserved for boogeyman stories. The drifter had accumulated a string of misdemeanors throughout the '80s, trespassing on private property, voyeurism, and petty theft. What made him particularly unsettling was his habit of vanishing for months, sometimes years, before reappearing in town as if he'd never left. Property records confirmed that Wilford Crane, his older brother, had owned the farmhouse where Rachel's vehicle was discovered. Wilford had died of heart failure in 2004, but neighbors reported seeing someone matching Clyde's description hanging around the property both before and after Wilford's death. "He always gave me the creeps," said Eleanor Winters, who owned the adjacent farm. "Sometimes I'd see him just standing in the fields at dusk, watching the road like he was waiting for someone." The elderly woman shuddered as she spoke to investigators. Wilford was odd but harmless. His brother was different, had eyes that followed you. What troubled investigators most was the timeline. 3 different witnesses placed Clyde in Willowbend during the spring of '98, precisely when Rachel disappeared. A waitress at the Willowbend diner recalled him sitting by the window for hours on Sundays, nursing a single cup of coffee. He'd watch the cars go by, she told police. Always seemed interested in the young women driving alone. The discovery of Clyde's possible involvement electrified the community. Dana and Mark Dunham appeared on local television, pleading for information about the man's whereabouts. Their faces, worn by 12 years of uncertainty, briefly animated with desperate hope. "If you know where Clyde Crane is," Mark implored, his voice breaking, "please help us find our daughter." But Clyde, true to his nature, had vanished once again. His last known address was a motel room in Fort Wayne, abandoned in 2009. Credit records showed no activity. Phone numbers led nowhere. The man who might hold the key to Rachel's disappearance had become a ghost, just like the young woman herself. The locals at the Willowbend Diner had plenty to say about Wilford Crane once his name surfaced in connection with Rachel's case. The 67-year-old was a fixture at the corner booth, nursing the same cup of coffee for hours while scribbling in those notebooks of his. Marge, the longtime waitress, remembered how he'd lower his voice whenever Sheriff Tompkins came in for lunch. "That man would mutter strange things," she told investigators, "always saying he knew things the sheriff didn't know, and that some girls just want to disappear." Wilford had died of heart failure in 2007, 3 years before Rachel's Firebird was discovered on his property. The farmhouse itself was a trove of disturbing evidence. In the damp cellar, beneath stacks of moldering newspapers, detectives found 17 spiral notebooks filled with cramped handwriting. The pages contained what appeared to be surveillance notes, women's initials, locations, routines, and dates stretching back to the early 1990s. RD, Parks near Mile 22 Sundays, read one entry dated April 1998, just weeks before Rachel disappeared. Red car, always alone, windows down, music loud. Forensic document examiners confirmed what investigators suspected. Two distinct handwriting styles filled the notebooks. The neater, more methodical entries belonged to Wilford. The jagged, aggressive scrawl was attributed to his younger brother, Clyde. Former neighbors recalled the siblings with a mixture of pity and fear. Wilford was odd, but harmless, said Eleanor Phelps, whose property bordered the Crane farm for 30 years. But when Clyde came around, we kept our daughters inside. Something wasn't right with that man. Clyde Crane's criminal record painted a troubling picture. 3 arrests for trespassing in the 80s, 2 for voyeurism, and 1 dismissed charge of attempted abduction in 1984. He'd drift in and out of Willowbend, sometimes staying at his brother's farmhouse for months before vanishing again. The notebooks suggested a disturbing collaboration between the brothers. Wilford appeared to track potential victims, noting their routines, vehicles, and when they were most vulnerable, while Clyde's entries were more action-oriented, describing approaches and interactions. Most chilling was the system of symbols the brothers had developed. Small stars marked certain entries, including Rachel's. Of the 11 women whose initials were starred, 3 had been reported missing between 1994 and 2001. None had ever been found. The investigation now focused on locating Clyde, who hadn't been seen in Willowbend since his brother's funeral. Bank records showed he'd withdrawn his modest inheritance in cash and seemingly vanished. The last confirmed sighting placed him at a truck stop near the Indiana-Michigan border in early 2008. As detectives pored over the notebooks, one question loomed larger than all others. If Rachel had been taken by the Crane brothers, why was there no mention of her after May 3, 1998? The call came in on a Tuesday morning, anonymous but precise. A maintenance worker at the abandoned Riverside Motor Lodge outside Joliet had noticed something unusual while salvaging copper pipes from the dilapidated structure. Detective Robert Keene drove there immediately, his sedan kicking up dust in the crumbling parking lot where weeds pushed through concrete. The motel had been shuttered since 2005, its neon sign long dark, windows boarded with plywood that had weathered to gray. Inside, the air hung heavy with mold and abandonment. The maintenance worker led Keene down a corridor of rooms, flashlight beam bouncing across peeling wallpaper. "In here," the worker said, pushing open door 17. What Robert found stopped him cold. The walls were covered in murals, not graffiti, but carefully rendered portraits of a young woman with flowing red hair. In some, she looked peaceful, almost meditative, staring at distant horizons. In others, her eyes were wide with terror, hands reaching outward as if pleading for rescue. The paintings varied in skill, but shared an unmistakable subject, Rachel Dunham. Beneath each portrait, scratched into the plaster with what appeared to be a nail or key, were the initials RD. The detective photographed everything, his camera flash illuminating the haunting gallery. Later that day, he called Mark and Dana Dunham, his voice carefully measured. "We need handwriting samples," he explained. Anything Rachel wrote, notes, journals, birthday cards. The Dunhams delivered a shoebox of their daughter's high school essays and letters the next morning. Forensic document examiners needed less than 48 hours to confirm what everyone suspected. The scratched initials matched Rachel's handwriting. "This changes everything," the lead investigator told the assembled team at Willowbend Sheriff's Office. "We have physical evidence she was alive at least until 2005, possibly creating these images herself." The motel's former owner, when tracked down in Arizona, confirmed he'd rented room 17 long-term to a quiet couple in 2004, a man in his 50s and a younger woman he rarely saw. They paid cash monthly and requested no maid service. The guy reminded me of someone, the owner recalled during a video call. Nervous type, always watching. Kept to himself, but was particular about privacy. When shown a photo of Clyde Crane, the man hesitated. Could be him. Hard to say for sure after all these years. The discovery at the riverside established the first confirmed location for Rachel since her disappearance. But it raised more questions than answers. Had she been held captive, expressing her terror through art? Or had she created these images voluntarily, leaving her initials as breadcrumbs for someone to follow? The murals themselves told conflicting stories, some suggesting imprisonment, others hinting at moments of tranquility. Like everything in Rachel's case, even this revelation remains stubbornly enigmatic. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early December, just as Detective Sarah Mullins was about to leave for lunch. The voice on the other end belonged to Elaine Forrester, calling from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Her mother, Martha Forrester, had been watching the news coverage about Rachel Dunham's Firebird being discovered and had become agitated, insisting there was something important her daughter needed to tell the authorities. "My mother took in a girl back in 2002, Elaine explained, her voice wavering. Red hair, just like Rachel. She was jumpy, always looking over her shoulder. Wouldn't tell us her real name. Called herself Rose. Said she was just passing through." The Forresters had found the young woman huddled in the vestibule of their church during a snowstorm. Martha, a widow with a generous heart, had offered her the spare bedroom. For 4 days, the mysterious guest barely spoke, spending hours staring out windows and starting at every passing car. She wore long sleeves despite the warm house, and Martha had glimpsed what looked like faded bruises when the girl reached for a cup of tea. She helped with dishes, swept floors, seemed desperate to earn her keep, Elaine continued. But she never used a phone, never mentioned family, just paid for groceries in cash from a roll she kept hidden in her sock. On the 5th morning, the red-haired woman was gone. No note, no goodbye. The spare bed was made with hospital corners, and a small wildflower had been placed on the pillow, the only acknowledgement of her stay. The story might have ended there, filed away as just another encounter with a troubled drifter. But 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived at the Forrester home containing 5 crisp $100 bills and a handwritten note. "Thank you for your kindness. Please forget my face." Over the next year, 3 more envelopes arrived, each with the same amount, each signed with only the letter C. "We thought it might be her initial," Elaine said. "But now with all this news about Clyde Crane, I can't help wondering if he was paying us off." Investigators debated both possibilities. Was it Clyde ensuring the Forresters' silence about a woman he'd been controlling? Or was it Rachel herself, using the initial of her captor as a signature, a subtle cry for help, or a warning to stay away? Martha Forrester, now 83, insisted the woman's eyes held secrets no young person should carry. When shown a photo of Rachel from 1998, the elderly woman nodded slowly. "That's her smile," she whispered, "but not her eyes. Her eyes had seen things by then." The evening air at Willow Lake carried a chill that had nothing to do with the October breeze. Dana and Mark Dunham stood at the water's edge, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of paper lanterns. After 12 years of emptiness, the discovery of Rachel's Firebird had awakened something in Willow Bend. Not quite hope, but a collective breath held too long finally released. "We gather tonight not just to remember, but to reach out," Mark announced to the crowd, his voice steadier than it had been in years. His wife clutched his hand, her eyes fixed on the lanterns they'd prepared, one for each year their daughter had been missing. The turnout surprised even the most optimistic residents. Hundreds of people formed a crescent around the lake's edge, many holding photographs of Rachel. Former classmates from Willow Bend High shared stories of her tutoring sessions and her quick wit. An elderly librarian recalled how the young woman would reorganize the community library's poetry section just because it deserved better. Local news crews from Indianapolis positioned their cameras discreetly among the mourners. A reporter whispered questions to Robert Keene, who had never stopped investigating the case. The private investigator shook his head, unwilling to speculate on camera about what the discovery of the automobile might mean. Rachel loved this lake, Dana told a small circle of supporters, her voice breaking. She said the water reminded her that some things can be both still and moving at the same time. She paused, looking out at the floating lights. Like her. As darkness fell completely, the Dunhams led the procession to the water. One by one, people released their lanterns onto the lake. The lights drifted outward, forming constellations of hope against the black water. Sheriff Thompson stood apart from the crowd, his weathered face revealing nothing as he watched the proceedings. The discovery of the vehicle had raised uncomfortable questions about the original investigation. Why hadn't they found the barn? What had they missed? Near the back of the gathering, Colleen Moss, the realtor who had discovered the sports car, wiped tears from her eyes. She hadn't known Rachel, but unlocking that barn door had connected her to this story forever. Maybe she's watching, whispered a teenage girl to her friend. Maybe she'll come home now. The sentiment rippled through the crowd, unspoken but palpable. For one night, the mystery that had divided the town with suspicion and theories united it instead. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years found themselves standing shoulder to shoulder, passing tissues and sharing memories. As the last lantern floated toward the center of the lake, Dana Dunham closed her eyes. "We're still here, Rachel," she whispered. "We're still waiting." The envelope arrived at the Willow Bend Herald office on a Tuesday morning, mixed among bills and promotional flyers. Thin and unremarkable, it bore a Montana postmark and no return address. When editor Jim Howell sliced it open, a single index card fell onto his desk. 5 words were written in neat, deliberate script. "I never stopped driving. Thank you." The newsroom fell silent as the card passed from hand to hand. Something about the handwriting seemed hauntingly familiar to anyone who had followed Rachel Dunham's case. Within hours, Dana and Mark Dunham stood trembling in the Herald's office, staring at what might be their daughter's first communication in 12 years. "It's her handwriting," Dana whispered, tracing the loops of the letters with her fingertip. "The way she crosses her T's, it's Rachel." The FBI dispatched 2 independent handwriting experts who confirmed what the Dunhams already knew in their hearts. The penmanship matched samples from Rachel's high school essays and library volunteer logs. The pressure points, the slight rightward slant, all consistent with the young woman who had vanished on that spring Sunday in 1998. Sheriff Landon immediately requested security footage from every post office within a 100-mile radius of the Montana postmark. 3 days later, grainy video from a rural Big Sky postal branch revealed a slender woman in her early 30s dropping an envelope into the outgoing mail slot. She wore oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, but her movements, quick, purposeful, almost furtive, suggested someone accustomed to staying hidden. "She's alive," Mark Dunham told reporters, his voice cracking with emotion. "Our girl is out there." The cryptic message spawned endless theories. Was never stopped driving literal? Had Rachel been on the run for 12 years? Or was it metaphorical, a nod to her Sunday drives that had once been her sanctuary? The simple "thank you" raised even more questions. Was she thanking her parents for never giving up? The community for the vigil? Or someone else entirely? FBI agents descended on Big Sky, canvassing motels and diners with photos of what Rachel might look like now. They found scattered reports of a red-headed woman who kept to herself, paid in cash, and never stayed more than 2 nights in one place. A waitress at a highway diner recalled a woman matching the description who ordered coffee and asked detailed questions about back roads leading toward Canada. The Dunhams clung to hope even as the trail grew colder. The letter, whatever its intent, had accomplished something profound. It had transformed Rachel from a vanished memory into a living, breathing possibility. Somewhere out on the endless highways of America, their daughter was alive, moving, perhaps even finding her way back to them. The FBI's arrival in Willow Bend changed everything. 2 agents in crisp suits set up a command center in the sheriff's office, bringing with them resources the small Indiana town had never seen. Special Agent Melissa Harmon, a veteran of missing persons cases, pored over the Montana letter for hours, comparing it to Rachel Dunham's college essays and diary entries. "The handwriting analysis is conclusive," she announced to Dana and Mark Dunham during a tense meeting. "Your daughter wrote this letter. The question is whether she did so freely." The Dunhams sat across from the agents, their faces a complex map of hope and dread. Dana clutched her husband's hand as the FBI outlined 2 distinct possibilities. Rachel had either been abducted and held for years before escaping, or she had chosen to disappear, perhaps fleeing something or someone unknown to her parents. "But why wouldn't she come home?" Mark asked, his voice breaking. "We never stopped looking." Psychological profilers joined the investigation, constructing theories about Rachel's mental state. Dr. Eleanor Witt, a specialist in trauma and captivity, suggested that if Rachel had been under Clyde Crane's control, she might have developed complex coping mechanisms. Stockholm Syndrome is only part of it. Dr. Witt explained during a briefing. After years of isolation, returning to normal life becomes terrifying. She might believe she's protecting you by staying away. Other experts proposed a different narrative, that the independent college student had orchestrated her own disappearance, using the Sunday drive as her escape route. Perhaps the Firebird had been deliberately abandoned, a false lead to mask her true destination. The community divided along these lines. At the Willow Bend Diner, locals debated each new development over coffee. Some insisted Rachel must have been taken against her will. The scratch marks on the barn door told that story clearly enough. Others remembered her restlessness, how she would stare longingly at passing trains from the library windows where she volunteered. The FBI established a dedicated tip line, and calls flooded in from across the Midwest. A waitress in South Bend claimed to have served a woman matching Rachel's description. A librarian in Fort Wayne remembered a quiet redhead who checked out books on wilderness survival. Dana and Mark appeared on regional news stations, their exhaustion visible beneath careful makeup. "If you're watching, Rachel," Dana said, looking directly into the camera, "we just want to know you're safe. Come home or don't, but please end this silence." The FBI's presence brought legitimacy to what many had dismissed as a cold case, but answers remained as elusive as Rachel herself. Agent Harmon promised the Dunhams they wouldn't leave until they found the truth, whatever that might be. Detective Marla Saunders held the lab report with trembling hands. The forensic team's third sweep of Rachel Dunham's Firebird had yielded something extraordinary. A perfect set of latent fingerprints beneath the passenger door handle. They didn't match Rachel's prints, nor did they correspond to either Clyde or Wilford Crane. Instead, they belonged to an unknown woman who wasn't in any database. "This changes everything," Marla whispered to Mark Dunham as they stood in the fluorescent glare of the Willow Bend Sheriff's impound lot. The black sports car sat silently between them, its once gleaming paint now dulled by years of dust and secrets. Dana joined her husband, clutching his arm as the detective explained the implications. "We've always assumed Rachel was alone or taken against her will," the investigator continued. "But these prints suggest she had a companion, someone who traveled with her willingly." The revelation sparked fierce debate among the investigative team. Had Rachel found an accomplice during her escape from Willowbend? Or perhaps a confidant who helped her disappear? The prints were deliberately placed, not smudged or partial, suggesting whoever touched the vehicle did so with purpose and calm. Robert Keene, who had followed the case since 1998, developed a new theory. The unknown woman could be the same person who sent those money orders signed with C to the family in Kalamazoo, he suggested during a briefing at the station. Not Clyde Crane, but someone whose real name begins with C. Someone protecting Rachel. The FBI expanded their search parameters, combing through missing persons reports for women who vanished around the same time from neighboring counties. They interviewed former classmates from Indiana State University, seeking anyone who might have been close enough to Rachel to join her in whatever happened that Sunday in May. Most intriguing was the timing. The prints appeared fresh compared to other evidence in the vehicle, suggesting the mystery woman had accessed the automobile closer to when it was hidden in the barn, not when Rachel initially disappeared. She could still be out there, Dana whispered one evening, staring at the wall of photos and maps that had consumed their living room for over a decade. Maybe this woman knows where our daughter is. The passenger's touch opened new avenues of both hope and suspicion. Was this unknown woman a guardian angel who helped Rachel escape something terrible? Or something more sinister, someone who knew what happened but chose to remain hidden? For the first time in years, the investigation had momentum again. The community buzzed with speculation about the identity of Rachel's possible companion, and whether this mysterious woman might finally provide the key to understanding what really happened on that spring afternoon when a young college student and her automobile vanished without a trace. By mid-2011, the investigation into Rachel Dunham's disappearance had once again hit a frustrating impasse. The FBI's involvement initially brought renewed vigor, but as summer turned to fall, even the most dedicated agents began to acknowledge the case was growing cold. Dana and Mark Dunham found themselves back in the familiar pattern of desperate hope, followed by crushing disappointment. "It's like chasing smoke," Mark confessed during a rare interview with the Willowbend Herald. His eyes, permanently shadowed from years of sleepless nights, reflected the toll of their 13-year search. Yet despite official channels slowing down, whispers continued to circulate throughout the Midwest. A truck driver claimed he'd served coffee to a red-haired woman at a stop along Interstate 94 who froze like a deer when he mentioned Indiana. She paid in cash and disappeared before he could ask her name. 3 weeks later, at another truck stop 200 miles north, a similar sighting was reported. Robert Keene, still working the case despite the Dunhams' dwindling resources, followed these breadcrumbs with dogged persistence. The private investigator compiled a map of possible sightings that stretched from Michigan to Montana, each pin representing another might have been. "The most intriguing leads are the journals," he explained to Dana during one of their weekly meetings. 4 different flea markets near South Bend had reported weathered notebooks filled with poetry and sketches, all signed with the initials RD. By the time Keene tracked down the vendors, the journals had been sold to anonymous buyers. In Willowbend itself, Rachel's presence lingered like a ghost. The high school where she once tutored struggling students established a scholarship in her name. The community library created a special collection of her favorite books, each spine marked with a small red ribbon. "She's become more than just a missing person," observed Sheriff Tanner, who'd been a deputy when Rachel first disappeared. "She's become a symbol for this town, of both loss and hope." For families who'd lost children to accidents, illness, or other disappearances, Rachel's unresolved story offered a strange comfort. If she could still be out there somewhere, perhaps their own lost loved ones had found some measure of peace too. Dana Dunham began volunteering at a support group for parents of missing children. "Rachel taught me that absence isn't the same as gone," she told new members, her voice steady despite her pain. "Sometimes not knowing means you still have room for hope." As winter approached, the trail grew colder, but Willowbend's determination never froze. Rachel's story continued to pulse through the community like a heartbeat, faint but undeniably present. The spring thaw of 2012 brought unexpected answers to Willowbend. Construction workers digging trenches for new drainage pipes along the eastern shore of Willow Lake struck something metallic about 3 feet below the surface. What they unearthed wasn't just another piece of forgotten farm equipment, but a rusted metal lockbox, its edges corroded by years underground. Sheriff's deputies were called immediately. The box, roughly the size of a shoebox, was carefully pried open at the station. Inside, wrapped in plastic bags, lay 7 cassette mixtapes, each labeled in the same distinctive handwriting that Dana and Mark Dunham recognized instantly as their daughters. The tapes were remarkably well preserved, protected from moisture by their careful packaging. "These are hers," Dana whispered, running her fingers over the neat block letters. "Rachel always made these for her drives." Tucked between the tapes was a folded note on lined paper, the ink slightly faded but legible. "If you find this, let me keep driving." The handwriting analysis confirmed what the Dunhams already knew in their hearts. Their daughter had written these words. The mixtapes contained an eclectic collection of songs spanning from the early 90s to late 1990s. The first tape featured tracks about escape, Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run, Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, and Tom Petty's Running Down a Dream. Others contained melancholy ballads about longing and distance. Robert Keane, still working the case after all these years, developed the theory that the tapes represented a chronological journey, not just of music, but of Rachel's emotional state. "The final tape has songs about finding peace," the investigator noted. "Not happiness exactly, but acceptance." Forensic analysis placed the burial of the box around 2004, 6 years after Rachel's disappearance, and 6 years before her vehicle was discovered. This timeline suggested she had returned to Willowbend at least once during her absence, yet chose to remain hidden. The location itself was significant, less than a quarter-mile from where her Firebird would later be found, in the Crane farmhouse barn. Had she buried her past near the place that held her car, creating a time capsule of her former self? For the community, the discovery reignited both hope and confusion. The message seemed clear. Rachel wanted to be remembered, but not found. She had crafted this musical map of her heart and deliberately left it behind, a breadcrumb for those who loved her without revealing where her path had led. "She always communicated through music," Mark said during a small gathering at Willowbend Diner. "Even when she couldn't find the words, she found the songs." Rachel Dunham was more than just a missing person to the people of Willowbend. Before her disappearance, she had woven herself into the fabric of the community, leaving an imprint that time couldn't erase. At Willowbend High, she had been the patient tutor who stayed after hours to help struggling classmates with calculus problems they couldn't crack. "She never made you feel stupid," recalled Dina Mercer, who had been 2 grades below Rachel. She'd just say, "Let's look at this from another angle," and suddenly everything made sense. At the community library, the young woman volunteered every other Saturday, organizing reading circles for elementary school children. Dana Dunham still kept the thank you cards from parents who credited her daughter with sparking a love of books in their children. Rachel could make even the quietest kids speak up during discussions. The library director had told the Willowbend Herald during a memorial event in 2009. Her independence was legendary among her friends. While other teenagers congregated at the Willowbend Diner on weekends, Rachel often preferred solitude, finding freedom in the purr of her Firebird's engine and the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching before her. These Sunday drives weren't just transportation. They were meditation, a sacred ritual where she found herself. She used to say that driving was the only time her brain would quiet down, Mark Dunham shared at the Willow Lake Vigil, his voice catching. Since she could think clearer at 60 miles per hour than sitting still. In the years following her disappearance, Rachel's essence transformed into something larger than life. Local teachers at Willowbend High began awarding an annual Rachel Dunham Persistence Scholarship to students who demonstrated her trademark determination. The community library dedicated a reading nook in her honor, complete with her favorite novels, dog-eared copies of Kerouac and Plath that Dana had donated from her daughter's collection. Perhaps most touchingly, a new tradition emerged among Willowbend teenagers. Each year on May 3rd, a procession of vehicles, some borrowed from parents, others proudly purchased with summer job savings, cruised the county backroads in a tribute called Driving for Rachel. They followed routes she was known to take, windows down, music playing, celebrating not just her memory, but the spirit of youthful freedom she embodied. "She wouldn't want us crying over her," said Jessica Lohman, who had been Rachel's chemistry lab partner. "She'd want us living boldly, taking those Sunday drives, finding our own paths." Whether Rachel was out there somewhere, still charting her own course, or had met a darker fate, her legacy continued to inspire a small Indiana town that refused to forget the red-haired girl who vanished on a spring afternoon but somehow never truly left. The black Pontiac Firebird sits under fluorescent lights in the Willowbend Sheriff's Impound lot, a relic frozen in time. Its once gleaming paint has dulled to a matte finish, the chrome trim tarnished by years of neglect. Sheriff deputies occasionally run their fingers along its hood, as if touching a monument. For the people of Willowbend, the vehicle represents both a question and an answer, proof that Rachel Dunham existed beyond that fateful Sunday. Yet no resolution to where she might be now. Dana and Mark still visit the automobile monthly, bringing fresh flowers they place on the dashboard. The ritual has become part of their lives, a way to maintain connection with their daughter. "We just want her to know we never stopped looking," Dana whispers, her fingers tracing the steering wheel where Rachel's once gripped. Theories about what happened have evolved into local folklore. Some residents, particularly those who knew the Crane brothers, believe Rachel was held captive for years before orchestrating her own escape. They point to the murals found in Joliet and the cryptic notebooks as evidence of a calculated abduction. The mysterious fingerprints belonging to an unknown woman suggest Rachel may have found an ally, someone who helped her disappear completely. Others in town believe a different narrative, that the college student chose to vanish. These theories paint Rachel as someone seeking liberation from small-town expectations, using the opportunity to reinvent herself somewhere far from Indiana. The letter from Montana and the lockbox message, "Let me keep driving," fuel this perspective. Robert Keene, now retired from private investigation, maintains his own files on the case. "Sometimes people don't want to be found," he told the Willowbend Herald on the 15th anniversary of the disappearance. "And sometimes that's the healthiest outcome for everyone involved." The community has changed in subtle ways since the Firebird's discovery. Parents are more vigilant about their children's whereabouts. Young drivers no longer take solitary Sunday drives without telling someone their route. The high school where Rachel once tutored fellow students now offers self-defense classes. But perhaps the most profound legacy is how her story continues to resonate. Each year, new visitors come to see the sports car, drawn by internet forums and true crime podcasts that debate the endless possibilities. The mystery endures precisely because it lacks resolution, a story without an ending. For those who loved her, there's comfort in imagining Rachel somewhere distant but alive, her red hair catching sunlight as she drives along coastal highways or mountain passes. They picture her free, no longer defined by what happened in Willowbend, finally outrunning whatever or whoever caused her to vanish on that spring Sunday so many years ago.